Today is March 2nd, 1996. I am Charla Henson with Abilene Christian University. I'm here interviewing Homer F. Petross for the 12th Armored Division Oral History Project. I want to thank you for coming and talking to us today. We're going to start out with you telling us about your family, your mother, your father, your siblings, and your early years.
Well, I started out, my father and mother both lived and were raised in the central Texas town of Brown County and Comanche County, Texas. My mother was raised in Comanche County, my father, Brown County. And I was born in a little community just right close to Brownwood, a little town of Blanket, Texas. June the 10th, 1918. And my father, back then, that was during the First World War time, and I came along and kept him out of having to go to the First World War. But I wasn't lucky enough to have a son to keep me out. I had a son, but he didn't keep me out. My mother grew up her father was killed when she was 5 years old. It was a rather sad situation. My mother passed away last year, along about this time last year, 94 years old, I believe it was. But we were raised up in Brown County, Texas, and we were raised as farmers. I grew up on a farm, drove the old horses, practically made a crop. When I was 6 years old, I tried to go to school. My father tried to find a job to supplement the farm income, which was hard to do back then. And up until 1929, we lived on farms in Brown County, and then homesteaded a section of land in Sakota, New Mexico in 1929, and back then, you know, you could homestead land. And we went out there and stayed 2 years and started that and had to come back. And I came back and we moved back to Texas in 1931. And I finished my high school and went to work there as a mechanic at a Ford dealership there in Brownwood. And then, I don't know what you'd say, I moved up to service manager, I moved down to service manager, but anyway, I became service manager and was there when I was inducted into the Army.
Okay, I would like to know, tell me about your mother and father, their characteristics and some things that they would have given you to prepare you for life. What was important to them?
The most important thing that I can think of, both of my parents were raised up as members of the Church of Christ. They were Christians. I was raised in a Christian home, never had any problems whatsoever. In fact, I have made the remark that I don't know how lucky you could be. I can't feature what it would be like to not be raised up in a Christian family. And then my father was a singer, led singings for meetings, protracted meetings all over the country. And then after 1930, my sister, I had a sister that was born about 7 years younger than I am. And just the two of us was always in my family, just me and my sister.
Tell me about your high school years, what you were interested in.
Girls.
Girls?
Yeah. No, I had an awful hard time in school. I don't mind telling you. Back, you see, I was in school during the deep, refreshing years. I know that that's an old line when people go talking about the depression years. But I went to school, got what little education that I did there in Blanket, in the little town of Blanket. But we were classified as migrant farm workers, I guess, because every fall when the cotton harvest would come up out on the plains, we would have to go up there and pull cotton, pick cotton to make a living. And it was very seldom that I ever got to start school before Christmas. Well, that made it awful hard on me trying to make a grade, but not getting started until nearly midterm. And then, but I managed to, with the help of some good teachers and a lot of sympathy, I graduated from high school in Blanket in 1937, I believe it was. And I graduated in June, I believe it was, or May, and then me and my wife got married in December.
Tell me about the first time you saw her, and tell me her name, what her name was.
What her name?
What was her name?
Her name was Marydell Cantwell, and her father was a preacher, and he was a very, very strict preacher. I used to play basketball in high school, and I don't know whether you could realize it or not, but back in those days, those old-time preachers, they didn't anything interfere with church. You didn't play. I remember they had a croquet set. They wouldn't let us play croquet on Sunday afternoon. That was a no-no. You didn't do things like that on Sunday. And the first date that I ever had with her, we were having a basketball game there at Blanket, and I wanted to go pick her up and take her to the ball game, let her watch me play ball. And I went to their house to pick her up. And mind you, he was preaching at our church that we went to church, to there, a little country church just outside of Blanket. And he said, Homer, said, I think a lot of you, I said, I don't mind Marydell going with you. He said, I just don't like the idea of taking her on a date to a ball game. I mean, I don't know why, but he was against ball game. I think one of the reasons he was against it was because we got out there with shorts on. Even some of the girls, played basketball in shorts, and that was a no-no back in those days, You didn't show your body. And I think that was the main thing.
Did it make it hard on you? Or did he make it hard on you trying to court his daughter?
It did. I had to tiptoe for the light. Of course, like I say, I was raised up in the church, and I didn't consider myself wild, but I wasn't one of the best of the boys, I don't guess, back in those days. And, boy, he made his kids toe the line. He made them toe the line. And bless his heart, he raised a good girl, because I married her, and we've been married for 57 years. And she's been a good one.
How long did y'all date each other before you married?
Probably, not about a year, about all. Mm-hmm.
And what ages were y'all?
Well, I was 18 and she was 16. Mm-hmm.
And how did Dad
graduated when I was 18, and she was 16 and a half. I'm 2.5 years older than she is. But the funny thing, would you like to hear how I got? Okay, I was going with another girl. I don't know if she ever sees this tape. She may divorce me even now. But we double dated. And I was going with another girl, and she was going with another boy, which happened to be a church member there at Blanket, too. And we were in an old, I don't remember what, I believe it was a Plymouth car, an old car. And it was 3 couples that went out on this date. The 2 couples, me and my girlfriend and my wife and her boyfriend was riding in the back seat. I was sitting on one side, my girlfriend next to me, and then Miradell next to her, and her boyfriend on the other side. And I rode in that seat there with my arm around my girlfriend, holding Miradell's hand. and and after that, we kind of got a little more acquainted, and I hit her for a date. And lo and behold, she accepted, and we went to that ball game. But that's the way we got our first date.
Mm-hmm. So you married in what year again, tell me?
1937.
37. Mm-hmm. So...
December. It barely was 37.
Okay. Tell me the years before you went into the service, what you did, about your family, and how you got into the service.
Well, I had bought, I had bought a car, a 1933 Plymouth Coupe, which was, it was 5 or 6 years old then, but back in the Depression, that was a swanky car. And I bought that thing and financed it at the bank there at Blanket for $10 a month. And there was a man lived there in Blanket that owned a little 2-room house there in the west part of Blanket that fell in love with that car. And he just had to have that car. And I told him, I made him a price of it, and he said, well, as soon as I sell my house, well, I'm going to buy that car. I said, well, you know, Meredith and I have been married for about 6 or 7 months, and I said, we might be interested in trying to trade for that house. He said, okay. He said, what do you do? I said, what do you do? He said, I'll trade you that house and lot, and this Model A car that I've got here, even for that 33 Plymouth Coupe. So I traded for that house. And at that particular time, me and my father were running a little independent garage and service station there in Blanket. And we were having a pretty hard go of it. And so I went to the Ford dealership there in Brownwood and hired out as a mechanic. And we drove from Blanket to Brownwood for a couple of 3 years. Well, a little longer than that. Until the Army got me. And I was working at there, living in Blanket in the little $300 house. That's what I gave for the car to start with. And after I went to work there at the Weatherby Motor Company in Brownwood, then I got a letter from Uncle Sam congratulating me that I had been selected to serve in the armed forces. And my boss there was on the, well, what do you call it, what board did they call it? Selective Service Board. He was on the Selective Service Board. And he told me, he said, now I can get you a deferment. I said, no way. I'll let him get me one for just a few days. And I told him, I said, no, that's not right. And so it wasn't long until I went into the service. They drafted me. And I went and taken my basic training in Tyler, Texas, at the Infantry Replacement Training Center. That's how come me to end up a little bit late overseas. And after I went overseas, Meredell sold a little house there in Blanket and bought a new house in Brownwood. Gave $3,100 for a brand new house. In fact, she bought it before it was finished. And the payments on it was $31 a month. And with my Army pay and her working, we started paying for that house. And when I got back from overseas, in well, I got out of the service in 1946 when we moved into that house. But it's hard to realize of how much cheaper things were then than they are now.
Let's go back to your basic training. Tell me about the first day and kind of your experience in basic training.
Well, I went to Wichita Falls. No, it wasn't Wichita Falls. Some little town north of Roundwood. It's where I was inducted. And of course, everybody then were trying to get into something that you wouldn't have to go on the front lines. Well, I stayed there at that. Was it Mineral Wells, wasn't it? At Mineral Wells, I believe it was. Stayed there about 2 weeks, and they shipped me to Tyler Camp. Well, I went blank. Camp Fanning. And I remember when we drove up there in that bus, it said IRTC, Infantry Replacement Training Center. My heart stopped because I knew what that meant, that I'd be training to replace men in the infantry on the front lines. And that was not a good feeling. I was hoping to get to be a truck driver or a cook or anything, but infantry replacement training center. Do you know what replacement means? That means go in there and replace the men that have been killed. And when you're an old country boy, that hits you pretty hard. Hits you awful hard. But anyway, I went on in, and at that time we had a little son, about 3 years old. Our oldest boy was born in 1940. And I moved in down there to Tyler, and we rented a little, well, I guess you'd call it a camper trailer. And she stayed, her and the boy stayed there in that, and I would go camp all day. And when we would get off of duty at 5 o'clock, I'd catch a bus or something, or she would come out to the camp and pick me up. And we'd go back to our little cabin and stay till I had to report back every night at 10 o'clock. And that went on through all my training, which been from 5 o'clock in the afternoon till 10 o'clock at night together, and that's all. The rest of the time I was training.
Tell me about your first captain. Your first captain in basic.
Captain in basic?
Or your first captain, unit leader, sergeant, whoever was in charge of you directly.
Yeah.
Who would have that been?
Well, his name was Captain Hitchcock. Captain Hitchcock. He was an older man, but he was in real good shape. And he was very firm, but he was fair with everybody. And we'd go on those marches, those forced marches, carrying our full field packing rifle, maybe march 20 miles. He was leading the march. He was leading the march. But he wasn't carrying the big load that we was carrying. He was just carrying a little sack. But I thought a lot of it.
What was the thing that you learned in basic training that helped you the most in battle times? Anything specific?
That's hard to say. I've always said, of course, they put us through training of all kinds of rifles. I had training, advanced training in the old M1 Garand rifle, the 50 caliber machine guns, the 30 caliber machine guns, the Browning automatic rifle. I had extensive training in those. And they built us up physically pretty good shape. But now, I'm not going to say that training didn't do you any good. Of course, we couldn't have done it without the training. But don't let anybody kid you that they can tell you in training what combat is like. Because they can teach you and train you what to do and what not to do. And you think you know what to do. But when you get there and the real bullets start flying at you, it's a different story. And I'm not going to say that it'd be hard for me to say what was really would have been beneficial to me other than just knowing my weapons and knowing how to handle them. Because you learned more the first day that you were in combat than you learned all through training. It's taken one day. If you lived through that first day, you had a pretty good chance. That's all I've always said. That you learn more under that first real close combat than you learn through all your training.
When you left Tyler, where did they send you? And did any of the other men from Tyler go with you?
Yes, there were several went with me from Tyler, and we after we left Tyler, we went to got a 15-day delay en route, and then I reported back to Tyler and caught a train to Washington Fort George G. Meade, Maryland. It's just out of Washington, D.C. And they shipped us by train to Fort Meade, and they stayed there about two weeks, something like it. And then they taken us down to Fort News, Virginia. And we caught a boat at Fort News, Virginia. And they didn't tell us where we were going. Not a thing in the world. It didn't. But there was a group of my pretty close buddies from Tyler that was on had the same orders I did. But anyway, we got on that ship, and not knowing that the war was going on in Japan, and Germany, all over. We didn't have any idea where we were going. No idea. We sailed for 13 days and nights. And every once in a while, we would see land, but we didn't stop. And when we finally did stop, it was Naples, Italy. We docked in Naples, Italy. And went up to a camp there and stayed a short while. And they sent us up to northern Italy, up to around the Brenner Pass, where they were still doing a lot of heavy fighting. And we got in a little combat there, but for some reason or other, I don't know why, they pulled us right back and taken us back to Naples. We got on the ship and sailed between the two little countries of Corsica and Sardinia and landed in Marseille, France. And we got on a train and headed for Nancy, France. And that's where I joined the 12th Armored Division in Nancy, France.
Give me some of the names or some of your friends that ended up in the 12th Armored with you that came from Tyler. Is there anybody that came clear through, and who those men were?
That went through from Tyler?
Did anybody end up getting to Nancy, France with you?
The only one that I can call off was George Calder. That would happen to live there and around with me. I wished I'd brought that little book with me. It's got those addresses in it, but they was I'm going to say there were 4 or 5 that was in training with me that went on and went into the 12th Armored. When we left Italy there, they separated a bunch of us. They sent some first one place in the other. And how I ended up with the 12th, I'll never know. Well, I guess they just holding us back until they had lost some men and needed some replacements, and they lost some men at Herlisheim, and that's where I replaced them.
Okay, so you went in the 12th right after Herlisheim?
Actually, right before Herlisheim, I went into the 12th, but I was in the 56 there, and I hadn't really settled down to knowing what was going on, and then Herlisheim hit, and then just right after Herlisheim, then I got moved into the 17th. Now that's the best I remember. It's everything was so hazy and fuzzy along about that time. It's so hard to bring all that. But I remember I went into the 17th, and the first real combat that I had with the 17th was at a little town they called Herlisheim 2. You may know more about that than I do, but it was that's where I first hit combat with the 17th. And then after Herlisheim, then we went into Colmar, and we transferred into Patton's 3rd Army as a secret division or a mystery division. And I was in the 17th through all of that. I was in the 17th from Herlisheim all the rest of the way through until we hit Austria.
Who was the first person that you met when you joined the 17th? Is there any person?
When I met the 17th, the first person that I can remember meeting was our half-track driver. His name was Willard Pottinger. That's the first one that I actually remember in the 17th.
When you joined the 17th, how many original members, do you remember how many original members and their names that had started before
Started with the 12th?
Yes.
I couldn't say for sure, but they wasn't over. You mean in the whole 17th? Oh.
Well, let's say in your squad.
Well, in my squad, I'm going to say probably 6 or 8, maybe, because there was about 4 of us went into this same squad at the same time. They had, in other words, those guys that had been in some combat, they were having to rake in some new men.
Who was your captain? Who was the captain when you joined?
The captain when I joined the 17th, Captain Ferguson.
Can you describe him? Describe him for me?
Huh?
Can you describe him for me?
Really,
what he was like?
Really, it's hard to do. I mean, I couldn't. The best I remember, he's a pretty tall and slender guy. He was he's very firm. But there was one thing that he demanded of you when you was on those front lines. He wasn't Captain Ferguson. He was Fergie, because he didn't want anybody on the front lines calling him Captain. He was just one of us, Of course, the enemy, they were looking for officers. They liked to shoot officers, and he was very restricted. In fact, kind of a funny thing happened, and I'm not sure, but it may have been Maurice Glover himself, because he was one of our spotters, artillery spotters. And I remember somebody sent me back from off the front line back maybe 100 yards back to Captain Ferguson, and with a question to ask him, said, "Fergie, do you happen to have the field observer's map?" And I remember Captain Ferguson very plainly saying, "Hell no, I don't have his map. You go tell him to find that map if he's lost it." Now, it may have been Maurice, because there was 2 of those guys in those planes. They'd take time out most of the time flying, picking out targets for us. And either him or his partner, one of the other, was the one that had lost his map. And Captain Fergie said, "No, I don't have his mount." And the first time that Mr. Schaefer, Mr. Glover, told me about what he did, I thought of that. I just wondered if he was the one that had lost his mouth.
Right.
Of course, he wouldn't remember. But, you know, after 50 years like that, and so many things happening, you might have buddies come in and not last a day, you know, and everybody's changing and going and coming. It was pretty hard to remember them real close, because we had close buddies, and there were very few that went clear across. Just like the time our half-track got blew up, there was supposed to have been 12 in it. Of course, I wasn't in it at the time, but there's 6 killed, which just left 5 that was in there that survived. And we got new men coming in, you know. And it's like it was when I was talking to one of the fellows up there at St. Louis. He was in my same outfit, and I couldn't place him no way. I kept trying to place him. He said, "Well," said, "you didn't have much time to get acquainted with me." He said, "I came into 8 Company in the 17th right before we crossed the Danube River. And we crossed the Danube River, and then I got hit. I was just in combat 3 days. So you don't have time to learn anybody very well that short time, you know."
Where was y'all's half-track blown up? Where did this happen?
It happened right before we got to the Rhine River, while we were under General Patton's command. We had left. Let me tell you a little story about that half-track getting blown up. Now, this is quite an interesting story. I've told it for 50 years. And but we were spearheading towards the Rhine River. Spearheading, they called it the Patton's Mad Dash to the Rhine. And my particular half-track was to lead the spearhead, would be the front vehicle when we pulled out. We had taken a little town and had stopped by the side of a road. And beside that road there was a haystack. And we had stopped our half-track right beside that haystack, and all of the vehicles lined up behind us. And when we stopped, we didn't know whether it was going to be there 10 minutes or whether it was going to be there 2 hours. We did have to wait for orders to move on to our next objective. Well, I told the boys, I said, "That haystack looks awful inviting there. I'm going to crawl off in that haystack and take a nap." We were all dead for sleep. I said, "When they give us orders to move out, wake me up." Well, when they got orders to move out, for some reason, they did not wake me up. I'll never know why, except I think the good Lord had something to do with it. But anyway, our half-track was the lead track, and the boy that taken my place on the machine gun, they drove down about 2 miles, turned the corner, went face to face with a German. Now, I've always said it was a German 88 Miller shell, but it was a big shell. But I've had one to tell me that it was not an 88. But anyway, it was a big shell. Went through the windshield, cut the machine gunner half in 2, exploded in the rear end, and killed 6. The only 4 that survived in the back end was each man, each corner. So I was told in St. Louis. And this Bob Stanton was the man that was standing in the left rear corner that survived. And the driver, them 5 survived. And me, asleep in the haystack, survived. And I met the man that survived that attack for the first time in 50 years at St. Louis, which made me break down and cry like a baby.
Mm-hmm. How did you find out about what had happened? Who woke you up? Or?
Well, I guess the movement of the vehicles, the tanks and the half-tracks and everything, I can't remember how I woke up or why, but anyway, I woke up and caught just jumped on one of the vehicles as it went by. And I hadn't, cause I'd been hollering back or something that they knew that a half track had been blown up ahead of us. And I made my way on up. We got up to where pretty close to it, and I got out and walked on up there and seen the mess. And they were hunting me at the time. I didn't know it, but when I told, when we were talking about it, me and Stanton was talking about it, he said, so you're the one that we couldn't find. He said the medics came up, and after they had destroyed that gun, or he left anyway, the medics got the medics up there, and they were trying to get the killed and the wounded out, you know, and all that kind of stuff. I think him and the driver was the only ones that was not wounded. There's 6 killed and some others wounded. And they knew that I was supposed to be there. They couldn't find me. And he said, I remember that. He said, I don't remember who it was, but I remember we couldn't find one of our men, and come find out he wasn't even on the half track.
So you were
and what made me go to sleep in that half track in that haystack at that certain time? The good Lord wasn't through with me.
Yeah.
I hope that's real.
You were supposed to be at the, if you had been awake and been in there, you were the gunner?
I would have been on that machine gun that the one that taken that machine gun was cut half in two.
Yeah. Then what did they do? Just replace everybody into the A company then? Did y'all have replacements at that point, or what happened to y'all?
Well, the best I remember, they pulled maybe 1 or 2 out of another squad and built ours back up. And that's when we got Angela 2 that I gave you pictures of with Angela 2 wrote on. Old Pottinger was the half-track driver, and his girlfriend was named Angela, and he had named Angela, that half-track Angela. When Angela got blowed up, then they got us another half-track, and he put Angela 2 on it, and I have pictures of it. You have them there. You've seen them. And you have a picture of me and Pottinger standing by the side of Angela 2. So that's the half-track. And then, well, when I say they brought people from other squads, maybe to build that squad back up, maybe we wasn't full force for a while, and then they bring in replacements and till we build it back up force. They usually had, I guess, a backlog of replacements pretty close behind us, ready to take place when we got shot up, because we'd get shot up pretty often. It's pretty rough go.
Were you ever wounded?
I never got a scratch. Now, I got hit one time, which was I considered real lucky. Me and I don't remember who it was, but we had started, and I could, if I could go back today to that same place, I could show you step by step just about it. We had gone down into a little valley towards a little creek in an open field, and the Germans opened up on us with artillery and pinned us down out there in the middle of that field. And me and one of my buddies was pretty close together, and every time you could hear the shell coming, we would hit the ground flat and lay there until that exploded, hoping and praying that it didn't hit close enough to you or doing damage. But anyway, then as soon as that shell exploded, you would jump up and run until you would hear another coming, and you'd have plenty of time to hit the ground before it got there, you know. And he and I were pretty close together, and this shell fell right close to us. And I heard him scream. He said, "I'm hit." I said, "I am too." That same shell hit, no doubt, hit both of us. And I looked down, and this piece of shrapnel, probably that big around, had hit me on the leg right there, but it hit flat. It didn't even cut the hide. It didn't even cut my trousers. And but it raised a big old knot. And I thought I was wounded bad. I was afraid to pull my trousers down to see how bad it was. But anyway, he was hurt bad, and I had to help him get off. And I remember very well us going arm in arm and hitting that ground and back up again. And when I finally got him back to the medics, I found out later from the medics, I never did see him anymore, that he had completely lost his kneecap. His kneecap was completely gone. And he and I were walking and running out of there with him without a kneecap. And when I got a chance to pull my trousers down and look at my wound, it was nothing but a big kind of bloodshot knot there is all it was. It didn't cut the hide. And that's the only time I was ever hit. And,
tell me what it was like. What was this, how did you feel every day doing this over and over again? Was there something that kept you going?
Yes.
Or what was this?
Yes. You know, for some reason or other, I don't know why, I hated to shoot somebody. I didn't think it was right, but I knew that I had to. You don't go on the front lines, and stay unless you do. But I always felt like that I am not actually shooting anybody. He's got a weapon, and I've got a weapon. I've got to stop his weapon before he stops my weapon. It's one-on-one. And the only way that I can stop his weapon is stop him. And that's the way that I try to look at killing a man, is I'm not killing him, I'm stopping his weapon. And every time we would go into combat, I would tell myself, of course I'd get scared. Nobody tell you they was on the front lines and didn't get scared. But I really can truthfully say that I never did feel like that I was not going to come out. When we'd go into combat, they'd tell us, take that town, or take that wooded area. I'd tell myself, well, there's going to be a bunch of us that's not going to come out of there. But I'm going to be one of them that is. I'm going to lose some buddies, but I'm coming out. And lo and behold, I did every time. But I just had that feeling that if there's 5 men going to get killed, out of 6, I'm going to be the one that lives. I just had that feeling. I don't know why.
Did it make you more aware of what was going on around you to do what it took to keep yourself alive? You didn't make mistakes?
Of course, everybody made mistakes, but just like I say, if you go, I have always said that if you got through one hot battle, one real hot battle, you had 90% better chance than you did before that battle, because you learned a lot in that battle. In fact, just to kind of explain to you what you mean, I know we get replacements lots of times that had never been under fire. And maybe we'd be hid behind a log, and a sniper would get shooting at us. Well, I knew to keep my cotton-picking head down behind that log, because he's shooting in my head. Keep it down. But the first thing that new man would want to do is peep up over that log and see where that fires are coming from. Don't do that. Let somebody else find him, because he's shooting at you. Let somebody that he's not shooting at. And you learn things like that fast. That you better, if you want to get through it, you better let somebody else hunt the guy that's shooting at you. And it's one thing that comes to my mind. One time, you talk about getting scared. We were out in an open field. There's just a very few of us out there. I don't know how come just a few of us out, but anyway, it had old bedded land. You know, they had plowed it up, and it was deep ditches across there. And a sniper got shooting at me from some good long distance, I'm sure, because I could see the shells hitting the dirt around me and hear them popping. And I knew I had to get out of there because I was right just like a sign would up there on the side of that hill. He could get me. And when you get up and start running the opposite direction and then things, and it's zigzagging so he can't get a bead on you, brother, that takes something out of you. You have to run about 100 yards over that kind of field to dodging bullets. It's but I said I could outrun them.
With being on the front lines, and I get the impression that nearly every moment is, when you're in battle, every moment is just, because of that situation, did you men feel as a unit? Did you work as a unit, or were you?
Very much so.
How did that work?
Yeah, sure. We worked as a unit. If we would protect each other, of course, if we were dismounted off our vehicle and fighting on the ground, if one had to get up and move position or something, the others would keep them covered as best they could. I know one kind of funny thing happened. I wrote it in that little old book that I gave you. You may have read it, I don't know. I had set up this machine gun nest out at about, maybe 200 or 300 yards out the edge of a town. And I had this machine gun trained across the open area there, keeping the enemy down while our group went into town down this little road. And then they were going to get into town, and then they were going to turn around with their rifles and keep me covered while I came in. Well, before I got a chance to come in, I was laying there behind that machine gun, and this sniper got after me, and he popped one over my head and around, and about 2 or 3 around him. And I was laying as flat as I could with my head on the ground, and a bullet hit close enough to my face it knocked dirt in my mouth. And I thought, it's time to get out of here, And I couldn't run with that machine gun fast enough. So I jumped up and let that machine gun laying there. And I broke a new world record on about an 880-yard dash running into town. And I could hear that old sniper bullet popping over my head as I was going in. And we got into town, and they found out he was up in a tree, and we got him. And I got a tank to go with me back after my machine gun. This tanker stayed between me and the enemy, and I went back and got my machine gun and walked with the side of the tank back into town. But I set a new world record with it. I've always heard that a man could do his best with stiff competition. And when a high-powered rifle is your competition, you can run.
Is there a town or a place that was that stands out in your mind as the hardest battle, the most difficult battle?
Well, of course, like I say, I didn't, Herlisheim was by far the worst. But I guess Colmar and that little town of Herlisheim too, I personally had my worst.
Can you walk me through the Herlisheim too, and then Colmar?
Huh?
Can you talk me through Herlisheim too, and then the Colmar experience, your experiences?
Yeah, pretty well. Herlisheim too, I remember, we had left our vehicles. Now, right before we went into Herlisheim too, they had fed us. They had set up a chow line in kind of a churchyard deal up there. And we were in line here getting our food, hot food, thank goodness. And a German millimeter shell came in and hit that chow line and scattered a bunch of our food and wounded some people. But we got out of there, and we left our vehicles and we're walking up With the side of a fence. On our right was a field, open field, and on our left, across this fence, was a wooded area. And there was a railroad track right along the side of that fence. I can remember this as well. That's one thing that I can remember this as well. And we walked up this fence to a gate and across the railroad track and was walking up the trail towards the little town. And while we were going into this town, one of the companies had got pinned down. The Germans were beating the thunder out of a company, had pinned them down in this little town, and they had sent us in to rescue. And as we were walking through this wooded area, I'm going to say it was probably half a mile through that wooded area into town, we would meet the medics of bringing the wounded out. And I remember one of the old boys, one of those medics, or I'm not going to say he was a medic, or one of them on the stretcher, knew what we was doing. We're going in there to help his company out, you know. And I remember one of them saying, "Good luck, fellas. You'll need it." And boy, you talk about bringing to your knees, them carrying them dead and wounded out of there and telling you good luck, and you knew what you were going into. And we went in, and I didn't take the machine gun in there because we knew that it was going to be close hand-to-hand combat. And I carried with me what we called a grease gun. I don't know whether you ever heard of one, not just a 45 caliber machine gun anyway. It's a whole lot smaller and easier to handle at close range than the old 50 caliber. And I remember the first building I went up to. I started around the corner, I met a German, face to face right on that corner. And both of us fired at each other and jumped back. Went back around to the opposite corner of that building and met again. And both of us fired at each other again and missed. And the last time I seen him, I was running down the road this direction. He's running the other direction. He was just as scared as I was. And I remember we went on into that town and got the people, got the Germans out, killed some, run the rest of them out, liberated what was left of the company. And I am not positive, but I think that was the same little town that we spent the night in, the rest of the night. And we were tired, sleeping. And I slept on the floor, a group of us slept on the floor in a two-story building. And sometime during the night, I may be wrong on the town, but this happened anyway in one of the towns. We were so tired and wore out that the shell came in and blew the top story off of that building and didn't even wake me up. That's pretty tired and sleepy, you know. Pretty tired.
Do you know which company that was that y'all got out of there?
I sure don't. I don't know what company it was. I don't know what I ever heard of it. I might have known at that time, but it was. They just told us that a company had pinned down, and you got to go in and get them.
So y'all got them out.
That was a little town of Hertfordshire too.
Now let's get us on up to Colmar Pocket.
Really, now I think that we were under Patton when we went into Colmar, still under Patton. And we more or less, the unit, the best I remember on that, we more or less just circled that Colmar and hemmed the Germans up inside there and captured a big percent of the best I remember. About the only thing that I can remember exactly about Colmar is that I'm pretty sure it was in Colmar that I used that bazooka that like got my head blowed off. I know we were trying to cross a busy street. Well, it wasn't a busy street, but it would have in normal times. It was a big intersection. And a big German tank was sitting about a block up to the right of us. And every time we'd try to cross, he'd fire his cannon at us, and knock our vehicles out or try to. And I know I told this, our Lieutenant Scarver, please his name. He says, "Who can fire the bazooka?" Well, nobody didn't volunteer. Finally I did, and I said, "Let me have the thing. I'll go get him." Somebody went with me and carried another round of ammunition, and we walked up the alley, up to about where we thought we could see a tank, and looked around the corner of the building there, that old big tank right to the left side of it. We were facing his side. I loaded that bazooka, stepped around that corner there, and I tried to fire into his turret where he couldn't aim his gun, and all that. I tried to put that bazooka shell in that gears to lock him up. And I fired that bazooka and jumped back and reloaded. And then looked back around to see what he was doing. And when I looked around that corner, I looked right down the business end of that 88 gun. And the nozzle of that gun, probably, that big around, 88 millimeter. But it looked that big. It looked like a 55-gallon barrel. And I screamed at my buddy, I said, "Get out of here fast." And we wrote and run, and just as we left, he blew the whole corner of that building off where we were at. And I remember going back to the half track, and before I got there, I just throwed that bazooka in that half track, and I said, "Sir, don't never ask me to do that again." I said, "All them things are good for to get you killed. They won't hurt anything." And that's the last time I ever fired a bazooka. But it got me killed. And I'm pretty sure that was in the town of Colmar. Then after we left Colmar, then we went back to, I believe it was Linville, a town of Linville that had already been taken, the best I remember. And that's where we made our last final push to the Rhine River, spearheading General Patton. And we spearheaded to the Rhine, and somewhere between Linville and the Rhine River is where our first halfback got blown up. So I thought it was before Colmar, but Bob Stanton, who was in my squad, said no. Said it was right before we got to the Rhine. Said, "You just wrong as you can be." And so I didn't argue with him. But anyway, we got to the Rhine, and my unit crossed on a pontoon bridge at the little town of Germersheim. That's where we crossed the Rhine on the pontoon bridge under a heavy cover of smoke. And from there on, there's a lot of fighting, but it was mostly going fast, clear across Germany. We had a whip. They knew it. They'd stay and fight as long as they could slow us down, and then they didn't have three things to do: either stay there and die, or run, or get captured. And they knew it, and they didn't like either one of them.
Did y'all liberate any of the prison camps?
Yes, we helped liberate. Well, it's right before we got into Austria. I can't think of the name. It saved my life. Huh? Landsberg. Yeah, I think we. I'm pretty sure that's right. I remember going into one, and one of them they'd had just killed, and there was another one we went into, but I can't remember what it was. It may have been Dachau, but I don't think it was. We were real close to Dachau.
Can you, do you mind sharing with us what you saw when you went in there and liberated those camps, and how it felt?
Well, it was pretty much of a helpless feeling. At that time, I don't know whether the people in the United States knew or not, but we didn't realize, or we didn't know at that time, that Hitler was trying to kill all the Jews. We didn't know that. And we'd see the evidence of those men, young women and children and all that, killed, murdered. We wondered why. It was I seen some of it, but I really didn't get into them until after that the Germans had done left. You know? And you could see where they had their mass graves and their death chambers and all of that kind of stuff. Landsberg, I believe, was the name of that one. And it seemed to me like that we had something to do with Dachau. I can't remember. I just can't remember. But I know that one.
Are there any other action stories that I have not asked you about, or situations that you can remember that you want to share, but that I have not mentioned?
You mean just little things that happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I could tell you a little story of a shell that turned out to be a dud. We had taken a little town and had orders to take a wooded area, which was probably 200 or 300 yards from the edge of town. And they spread us out across that field on foot. And the Germans had set up their guns in the edge of the field there. And what town this is, I wouldn't attempt to tell you. But we got spread out over that field real good, and they opened up with crossfire, machine gun fire, crossing, about 2, maybe 3 foot above the ground. Well, that pins you down to where you can't move. You don't dare raise up, or it's suicide. After they've got us pinned down there, they opened up then with artillery fire and just flattering them big shells all over the field. And I can truthfully say that I don't think that there was a man on that field. We laid there for I don't know how long. Them just plastering, and of course they were hitting people there once in a while. And you could hear those men talking. And when you'd listen to them, they were praying. They were praying out loud. They didn't care who heard them. And while I was laying there doing my part of the praying, I heard a thump, pretty heavy thump. And I maneuvered myself around. You didn't dare raise up off the ground. I maneuvered myself around, and there was this, I'm sure it was 88, it was a big shell, stuck in the ground practically between my feet. And I couldn't decide what to do. I was afraid it was a delayed action, delayed trigger on that thing. It might explode any time, But I knew not to move or try to get up. And I laid there. It turned out that thing didn't explode. Maybe 1 out of 1,000 it wouldn't, And that makes you wonder, who defused that thing? I had some help from above. Ain't no doubt about it. I had help from above. Finally, they kept us pinned down there for so long that we called in the Air Force. And the boys in the P-47s and the P-51s started diving in and bombing and strafing the edge of that wood. And of course, we had radio contact with them, And they come in bombing and strafing, and they told us to get up and start walking. Well, as long as they bombed and strafed, they would keep the enemy down in this wooded area. And we started walking, and those boys kept diving. And they, with their machine guns, strafing this strafe of fur right in front of you as you walked across that field. I mean, they knew what they was doing. They was coming low and fast. And then when we got to the edge of the wood, they said, keep walking, we're going to keep diving, and we're going to shut off our fire. Of course, we knew they were going to shut off fire. The enemy didn't. And that'd give us a chance to get in on top of them while they were in their foxholes, hopefully. And I got into the edge of the woods on that particular deal and was behind a big tree. And the bullets got to flying. When they realized that the planes wasn't doing any damage anymore, they come up fighting. And I seen a foxhole over there to my left a little ways. And I thought, man, I got to get me some cover. So I run over there and in fact dove into that foxhole. That thing's already occupied by a German, but he was dead. So I shared a foxhole with a dead German for a few minutes there. I'll remember that little episode. There's little things like that comes up in your mind every once in a while.
Is there any person in your company that you remember that you were really close to, and when you think of the company, that person comes to your mind?
Really, the only one is a driver, Pottinger. I guess him and for some reason or other, I don't know why, this one that I was talking about being in my same squad, I never have been able to place him. I mean, really place him.
Tell me about your driver, about who he was, the things you remember about him.
Well, at that time, he was pretty much an old country boy, and he had taken his training with the 12th Armored Division. He was a half-track driver, and he was a good driver. And at that time, the way that I remember it, he was not married. His girlfriend's name was Angela, and that's what, of course, we got a half-track named after. But he lived in some of the northern states somewhere up there. I don't remember exactly where. But it's I don't know. It's hard to just pin down any one certain one. Now, there's an old boy by the name of from Beaumont, Texas. I can't think of his name. But anyway, I've got a picture of him that I gave to the museum to the college up there, and it wrote on the back of that it says the man you slept with. Yeah, I'm sure you remember seeing that picture. Well, he was a pretty close buddy, and why I can't think of his name. But anyway, how come us to sleep together that night? We had went into a little town, and I remember the name of that town too, Wort, W-O-R-T, Wort, Germany. And we were going to spend the night there. And we run the German people out of their home and slept in a feather bed that night. Slept warm in a feather bed. And me and this boy shared that feather bed that night together in the little town of Wort. And I am pretty sure, I am not positive, I'm pretty sure. Do you remember the story that the last 151 days that the 12th Army was in combat, they had 1 day's rest? I think that's how come that we spent the night. I think we were in Wart, Germany that day that we had that 1 day rest, because I remember we played baseball the next day out there on the side of a hill. And I'm pretty sure that story that I have read somewhere, that we had 1 day's rest in out of the 151 days. And in a little town of Wart. I'd like to go back to Wart, see see that house still there.
When y'all were making that final drive, you can't go 172 days without rest. How did y'all work any kind of rest and eating? And I mean, how did y'all do that? Did Did some of you sleep on the half tracks, or?
You'd sit down, if as long as we're traveling and there wasn't any bullets flying or anything, traveling from one place to the other. We just sit down in that half track and sleep sitting up, or you might stretch out. You never pulled your helmet off, slept in your helmets and everything, and just nap a little here, there, and yonder. Very seldom you ever get to go. Well, you just didn't go to bed. And sometimes after we'd take a town at night, we'd set fire to a lot of the buildings so it'd light up things so we'd see what we were doing. And then after we'd cleared the town, well, they'd tell us, well, you boys have got, we'll probably be around here for 3 or 4 or 5 hours, get some sleep. And they'd always send part of us out around to guard the town. You always had somebody out. I remember one time that I think a letter from my wife might have saved me from. I remember we had gone and gone and gone until we just dog-tired. And I can remember this so well. That there was a group of us in a little room and had put our blankets down and fixed to go lay down and go to sleep. And I remember the sergeant saying, "Okay, men, say your prayers and get some sleep if you can." Well, just about the time I laid down, somebody came to the door and said, "Homer Petross," said, whatever time it was, said, in about an hour and a half, I had to go out and stand guard post. And I blew my top. The first time and the only time that I know of that I actually like to have went berserk. I don't know whether there's anybody living today that remembers the episode or not. But I remember saying, how much does it expect a man to take? I said, we have got to have some rest. And I got up and I was kicking things. I mean, I was walking around the room kicking anything that got in my way. I just went berserk. And about that time, the mail man came in, handing out, calling names out that got mail, and I got a letter from my wife. And I sat down there and read that letter and calmed down, just as calm as you could be. And when time come for me to go out to my outpost, I was ready. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I hadn't got that letter. I don't know what would happen. I may have completely lost it. Mm-hmm. But I have seen men go berserk. I remember one old boy that came in as a replacement. And I've got his name in that little black book of mine. But anyway, he came in, and the first time he went into combat, we were riding down the road, and here was this dead German soldier laying by the side of the road, and with his head blown off, and his head was laying about 4 or 5 foot from his body. And somebody made some smart remark, well, he lost his head over that deal or something like that, And I heard this boy behind me there, close buddy, I'm sure, because he signed that book of mine. I heard him say something that made me take notice, and he had said, what would happen, where would they bury a person if he was to get killed right here? And I said, man, don't even mention it. And when I turned around, he had that M1 rifle, which the barrel of it was that long, up at his temple, under his helmet, and trying to get his thumb on the trigger to pull that trigger. He's fixing to blow his brains out. And I slapped the gun out of his hand and hollered back for the medics, and they came and got him. And I never seen him after that. I never did know what happened to him. But he had signed my little book, that I had it written in that book about that story. I mean, he had signed it, and then I added to that what happened to him. I can't remember just when he did sign it.
Are there any other things you want to tell me about before we kind of get to the point system and how you got out of the Army or anything like that?
Well, what about after the war was over? Of course, we went on into Austria, you know.
Okay.
We were in the edge of Austria when it's over with. And then we came back to, now we came back to two towns, stayed in one of them for and another one. One of them was Aalen, Germany, A-A-L-E-N, and the other one was Augsburg. And I am pretty sure that I was in Augsburg. And it kind of an odd situation happened. They were sending them by point system to different places, you know. Well, I didn't have enough points, and I was to come back to the States and then go to Japan. It's really what my orders were. But anyway, while we were there in Augsburg, I got a telephone call from my brother-in-law, who was in, about 150 miles from us, sir. I knew at the time what town it was. But anyway, I had made plans to catch a truck and go visit my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, in this town the next day. Well, about midnight that night, they come and woke me up and said, "You have orders to report to certain place to go home." And said, "You've already got orders to go visit your brother-in-law." He said, "Which one you want?" I said, "I'm going home. I'll see him in the States." Well, they put a bunch of us, just pulled us out by the point system, I guess. I never did know. We were only there a short while. I'm going to say not over 3 weeks there in Augsburg. And they pulled me out, and I went to Camp Lucky Strike at Le Havre and caught a boat and sailed into New York, knowing what our orders were, that we had a 15-day delay en route at home and then go to Japan. That was my orders when I left Germany. While we were on the boat, about 3 days out of New York, Japan surrendered. And we like sunk that ship because we knew that we were home to stay. And there's a lot of the poor fellas that had more points than I did were still in Germany, and I was home, which it didn't seem fair, but anyway, when we sailed by the Statue of Liberty in the New York harbor, it was about the day after Japan officially surrendered. And don't never kid yourself that they wouldn't have put on a parade in New York City. That's where I ended coming back home. And we stayed there just 1 or 2 days. And I called my wife from a pay telephone booth in New York City. She was working at J.C. Finney Company in Brownwood, a clerk. I called the store. When I called, somebody answered the phone, and I heard him say, "Meredell, New York calling." And I heard her scream. She was back to the store somewhere, and I heard her scream. Here she comes. And I caught that train to San Antonio. Caught a bus to Brownwood. Met her there. And then I had my regular orders, like I say, I believe it was 15 days, or maybe 30 days anyway, short time spent at home. And then I had to report to Fort Sam Houston and San Antonio to go to Japan. They still hadn't changed my orders, but I couldn't figure why I'd need to be going to Japan after the war was over there. I felt pretty secure, you know, but still didn't know. And me and my wife and another friend of mine that had come back on the same boat with me, he wasn't in the 12. But he lived there at Brownwood, and he had the same orders as I did. So we, about 2 or 3 days before we were to report to Fort Sam Houston, the two couples of us, and he had a little daughter and we had this son, decided we were going to go down about 2 or 3 days ahead of time and find us a place for our wives to stay while we were at camp. And lo and behold, this sounds like an impossible situation. But the next day after we left, I got a telegram from the Army with a 30-day extension on the delay. Well, my dad, of course, lived there in Brownwood, and he wanted to find me some way before I reported back to the Army, because he's afraid if I reported back, they'd keep me and send me to Japan. And he wanted to catch me to let me know that I had that delay in route. Well, you know, San Antonio is a pretty big town. And we had got us a motel room to stay in. And had gone down to a grocery store down there, not very far from that zoo there in San Antonio. And pulled up there in front of that grocery store, and we go in there buying groceries, and in walked my dad from Brownwood, Texas. And I said, I'd like to have a fit. I said, what in the world is going on? And he told me what happened. I said, well, how in the world did you find us? He said, I just happened to drive down the street and seen your car sitting there. Now, can you imagine anybody finding anybody that quick? He had never hunted. He just drove into town, there I said. In a town like San Antonio, not knowing where I was at. I still say the good Lord is behind some of that.
What did you end up, you were released at Sam Houston then?
No. I went to Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, after that. And it was in the 46, I've got it at home, but I forgot now. Anyway, it was in the middle of 46 before I got out of service. I went to Camp Gruber, Oklahoma, and they put me in a repair ordnance, call it ordnance, and I was a bookkeeper, kept records and for the ordnance depot there in Camp Gruber, and for about probably 6 or 8 months, and then got my discharge. Went back to Thailand, got my discharge.
And then what did you do after the Army? Tell me the rest of the story.
After the Army, I went back and got my old job back at the Ford dealership in Brownwood. I went back as a mechanic, and then put me as service manager. And I don't know, I stayed there as service manager until 1949, I guess it was. And I moved to Lubbock and got a job out there as service manager for a Lincoln Mercury dealership at Lubbock. Didn't you tell me you from Lubbock?
I'm from Lubbock.
Do you remember, it may have been out of business years and years before your time, Bennett Motor Company, Lincoln Mercury dealer on the corner of 17th and Texas. A lot of service managers there for them for a while. And then I moved on to Plainview and served and helped an old friend of mine open a Lincoln Mercury dealership there. And then went back to Brownwood as service manager and stayed there as service manager until 1963. Service manager at Ford dealership. And then I bought out a lodge, Lakeshore Lodge on Lake Brownwood, and run that lodge for a while and like to work yourself to death. We had big boat stalls and cabins and everything. And I kept that until 1968 and sold it and went to work for a school there in Brownwood. Well, actually, Bangs. I had a cousin that was superintendent of the Bangs school. And I went to work there at the school, and at that time they were getting this vocational education really going strong in 67, 68, 69. And he wanted me to go back to college and get my teacher's certificate and teach auto mechanics. Well, I did. I quit my job and went to the University of Texas at Austin and taken some courses, and then went to Texas A&M, taking some courses, and got my teacher's certificate. And by that time, well, that deal there had fell through, and nobody that was in school there with me from Fort Worth had a brother that was principal of high school here, or Turner High School here in Carrollton Farm Ranch. They needed a auto mechanic teacher. So I came over here in 1968 and interviewed and moved to Carrollton Farm Ranch in 1968, went to teaching school, auto mechanics, and taught up until 1982, and bought my Army time, and got to be 64 years old. And by buying my Army time, I had 20 years in teaching, and could draw my Social Security and teacher retirement, and I hung it up. Mm. And it's been a traveling and a working ball games and such like that for the last 15 years now.
As you look back over your experiences of World War II, is there something, and as somebody would listen to this tape about World War II and your experiences, is there something you would like for us to remember? Is there something you've learned that you would like to share with us about that?
About the only thing that comes to my mind right now is how we have got to watch to not let one man get strong enough to rule the world like Hitler come awful close to doing by just getting in there and getting the power going. And let me tell you something, I don't know what the history books say, but I know what it was then. Hitler liked to accomplish what he went after. He liked to have been ruling the world. And it's amazing how strong one person can get, and this whole world's got to remember those things and not let it happen, I think. And we got to get back to Christian living, family life, some way. I don't know how it's going to be done, but we've got to do it, or this whole world's going to come to an end. The good Lord not going to let it go on like it is long. I don't think.
Well, I appreciate your time and sharing these experiences with us.
Well, I hope that I have kind of answered some of the questions you wanted,
yeah,
and didn't get too outrageous with it. I get kind of warmed up on them things. I get kind of wild sometimes, and I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, and thanks so much.